Why don't we get started? Good morning to everyone. This is the press conference I have before our legislative meeting. Our monthly legislative meeting for November will be tomorrow. It is going to be preceded by a committee of the whole meeting. It's scheduled to start at 11 o'clock. The committee of the whole will be marking up three measures. Their appointment resolutions. Probably the most noteworthy of the three is an appointment to fill a vacancy on the District of Columbia Judicial Disabilities and Tenure Commission. That's the independent commission that evaluates the reappointment of judges, handles issues such as judges who appear to have medical issues or some other significant um, issue that affects their ability to continue presiding as a judge. The commission does not handle complaints with regard to decisions by judges, but it does handle any other issue with regard to judges, either in their continuing status or in their reappointment. That's the Judicial Disabilities and Tenure Commission. And the nominee whom I nominated is Dr. Maria J. Donahue, the LECA. If I remember correctly, the mayor has one or two appointments, the council has one, and then the courts have several appointments to that commission. That's at the committee of the whole. There's actually no other measures there are no measures from other committees. The legislative meeting, which is scheduled to start at 12, let me see, I'm going to go to the non-consent agenda, assuming that the items that are on consent are not controversial. On non-consent, we'll have final reading on the Early Childhood Educator Pay Scales Amendment Act. That went through first reading 2 weeks ago, and almost every council member commented before we marked up the bill. The bill was marked up, I think it was a 10-1 vote with 2 or 3 abstentions. Every member is dissatisfied that the funding for this program is not adequate. The council did vote for the funding that's in there, which was a little bit more than what the mayor had proposed, but doesn't reflect that the intent of the program is that we want more of these early childhood educators, think childcare centers, but recognizing that the adults who work with the kids in those childcare centers actually are educators. And we want them to have credentials, whether it is a certificate or even as much as a bachelor's. We want more of them to have those credentials. We want more of these childcare facilities. And we want the pay to reflect what is competitive with what, for example, DCPS is offering in pre-K 3 and 4 for early childhood education. And that means that the program is going to continue to grow in cost because there'll be more educators. The educators will have better credentials over time. And of course, the need for childcare centers, facilities is greater than what's currently being provided. Program is going to grow. What this bill does is actually reduce slightly, if I remember correctly, roughly 3%, the minimum pay that these early childhood educators receive. So council members were not happy about this. However, the alternatives, that is not passing legislation, would have been worse because it could mean that the Office of State Superintendent for Education, or OSSE, could reduce the number of facilities or could just simply reduce subsidies to these facilities, which would create more financial challenge for them. Or other strategies like that to stay within the budget. And in case any of you have not noticed, the council is making it clear we want agencies to stay within their budgets. So that's what this bill is. I expect it will be approved tomorrow. I think we have an amendment, which is why it's on non-consent. And if we don't have an amendment, then it's because it was not unanimous at first reading. Also on the agenda is an emergency version of the juvenile curfew. I meant to be brief before I came in here on what the details are on what the council member is proposing. I think I'll get a note in a second, so I can come back to that. Also on the agenda is decoupling legislation, DC Income and Franchise Tax Conformity and Revision Emergency Amendment Act. This is to decouple approximately 13 um, provisions that were part of what I call OB3. That was the big budget bill that the Congress passed, that Republicans passed. I don't think there was a single Democratic vote for it earlier this year. And because most of the states have some form of what we call coupling with federal tax law, those changes automatically go into effect in the district unless we take action to decouple. The reason why we are decoupling is because over the financial plan, this will save us about $600 million, which is significant, especially given other financial hits that the district has been taking as a result of federal actions. There are something like 83 provisions in the OB3 bill that's what I call the federal legislation that affect district law. But of the 83, the 13 that are subject to tomorrow's emergency legislation have the greatest financial impact. And because we were relying on the CFO for legislative language, they were the 13 were the easiest for the OCFO to draft. So that's what we have tomorrow. The effect of this will be to maintain the status quo for taxpayers in the district. And there's something to be said for maintaining the status quo. And then there's a reprogramming disapproval that I put on the agenda. We will see how members vote because this is something that we have not done before, but I'm moving this. It's approximately $5.5 million. The reason why I'm doing this is because of the overspending that has been taking place. And last week at the third hearing that the Committee of the Whole has had on this issue of overspending of different agencies, the CFO made it clear that agencies aren't in violation of the law because the council does these reprogrammings. And so even though they overspend, they don't overspend as a matter of law because we reprogram to fix the overspending. And if we don't want to continue this cycle, if we want agency directors to be held accountable, then as the CFO testified, we would need to disapprove of reprogramming. This is the smallest of the 3 end of the year reprogrammings that the mayor has sent to the council. As I said, this is 5.5 million. I want to emphasize that although this affects the police department, every officer who was entitled to overtime has been paid the overtime. And the effect of this disapproval would be an accounting, what do I want to say, an accounting adjustment or non-adjustment with regard to which agencies funds are being used. There are other items that are on the agenda, and I'm happy to answer questions about any of them. So let me turn it over for questions if there are any. You have a question? Actually, give me just a second before you ask your question. Yes.
Good morning. Just in general, looking for your reaction before we talk about the curfew legislation tomorrow on what happened over the weekend in Navy Yard with hundreds of kids, the National Guard wrangling them, and the curfew the mayor instated over the weekend. Do you have any reaction to what came out?
Well, I think it's very unfortunate that there are a number of juveniles who think that this is a good thing to congregate in very large numbers and then become unruly and disruptive. And I think the mayor was correct in her reaction, which was to establish immediately a curfew. And we will follow up with legislation tomorrow.
Any sense on where the council stands on the legislation? I know the last time that Pinto tried to pass this second emergency legislation, it didn't move through council. There was the hearing last week. So any idea where council stands or where you stand on tomorrow's emergency?
Sure. Well, I will be supportive. That's with regard to me. And I was supportive a month ago. I have not talked to members. As you know, the emergency last time needed five more vote, or, well, there were five who voted against the emergency declaration last time. I have not talked to those five members to see where they are. Several, in my view, several significant events have occurred since then. One of which was that the council had a hearing last week, which a number of members, I think rightly, said was needed, that if we're going to pass an emergency curfew only for 3 months in July, and then we're going to do it again, that we ought to have a hearing on the issue. So that's taken place. There was the event over the weekend. I don't know that I want to call it an event. The incident over the weekend at Navy Yard. Also, members are aware that I think because of the curfew that's at National Harbor, that there seems to be the more of this movement by juveniles into certain areas of the city. The what is happening is that apparently over social media there are these invitations to congregate, and we saw that a week ago, and then over the weekend. So that's new and different. And then I think Councilmember Pinto has made some revisions to the legislation, and so I think the combination. Could very well affect what the outcome is tomorrow.
And just one more question for me on the curfew issue. I know last week at the hearing, the executive came in and had said that they intend to make this permanent. They want it to be permanent. And that got some council members pushing back even on the emergency. They don't want to see it permanent. So they were concerned about it getting pushed through as emergency and later permanent. So do you have a stance on if there's a permanent tool you want to see in the district?
I think my own view in terms of what I'm comfortable with is I think we need to see this play out. So what we will have before us tomorrow is an emergency and temporary. The temporary will be in effect for 225 days after it receives two readings, the signature by the mayor, and the congressional review. So it wouldn't even become effective until the end of the year, and then it would be 225 days from then. So we will have a lot of time to see how this plays out, what the dynamic continues to be among the small number of juveniles. And when I say small number, there are far more juveniles in the metropolitan region than the couple hundred who showed up at Navy Yard. Recognize a couple hundred showing up at Navy Yard is not a small number, but I mean small relative to the total number of juveniles. And we'll see how this affects this urge to congregate and be disruptive.
Thank you.
Sam.
Chairman, would you mind specifying, like, watching it play out just a bit deeper? Like, what exactly are you looking for over the 225 days? Or I guess what would be the metric of a successful application of the emergency curfew?
Well, I think for one, a sense of whether this urge to congregate will continue. I mean, this seems to be, I hesitate to use the word, but I'll say this seems to be a fad with juveniles right now. They were doing it at National Harbor, then it seemed to quiet down. Now it's reemerged as something that the juveniles want to do, and maybe they will move on to something else. I don't know. Let's just see how this plays out. In addition, what I think was good about the curfew that we had over the summer was that it reduced these incidents. I think it eliminated them, and there were no arrests. We don't want, this is not about locking up juveniles. This is about deterring the behavior to congregate in large numbers and to then vandalize. And so, you know, if that continues to be the case, that says to me that this is pretty successful. If what we're seeing is that juveniles are now getting locked up and that there's a lot of controversy over, let's say, inappropriate tactics by law enforcement, then maybe we have a different view. I also think that, you know, having a hearing on permanent legislation will be very informative. I'd like to hear from some experts on what they think about the viability of curfews. You Part of the curfew proposal has been that the chief would be able to declare smaller areas with stricter curfew requirements. And to me, I think that sounds like a good thing. Um, let's see how it plays out, whether it ends up raising some constitutional issues, some police conduct issues, whether it actually quells this bad behavior by juveniles.
Just to follow up, Councilmember Henderson, during last week's hearing, she mentioned the increasing price of movies and other recreational activities, and she just contextualized the whole situation with just the reality that young people don't have places to congregate. I wanted just to get your thoughts on that, just especially since the incident took place on Halloween night, a time when young people are going to be out anyway. What say you to this whole concern that the bigger issue at hand, what people look at as the lack of common areas for young people? What say you about that issue?
Um, well, I hear that a lot. And I certainly think that the government should do everything it can to provide programming for juveniles so that there are constructive alternatives to this behavior. On the other hand, there are a lot of programs that are available to juveniles. And a part of me thinks that a lot of these juveniles who are congregating like this, they would rather congregate like this than to go to a movie or go to a rec center. We have a lot of rec centers in the city. And I think on a per capita basis, we have more than a lot of other cities do.
Clarifying question: are the rec centers open at night
I think we've had some of them open at night.
regularly?
Well, I'm thinking about the one across the street from where I live, where the lights are on until 10 or 10:30 at night. They're not on until midnight, but on the other hand, I think there's a basketball court that's later than 10 or 10:30. Um, there are a lot of alternatives. And so I think those are necessary, but I don't think that's really the issue.
And in regards to, I'm asking this question after having spoke with Deputy Mayor Apia.
And let me note, I think you're aware of this, Sam, that a lot of these juveniles don't live in the city. And don't tell me there aren't programs available in the state of Maryland.
So is it just a matter of communicating with your counterparts
No.
in Maryland, or?
No, I think this is chosen behavior.
So in regards to that, when it comes to permanent legislation, where do you currently stand on that?
As I said, I think we would benefit. I would like to see a hearing with some experts who come in and talk about the viability of curfews.
Mhm.
I would like a little bit of time to see how the emergency plays out. Adopting the emergency and a temporary means that if there's a gap when the emergency expires, we will renew it with what we call a congressional review emergency. I'd like to see how that plays out. Give this a little bit more thought. Curfews have always been controversial, and what we have before us is far stricter than what we've seen for decades in the district.
I got one more question for the time being. This is following the federal officer involved shooting on Benning Road.
Yeah.
Um,
Is that the one with the individual
sir.
with the traffic stop?
yes, sir.
And the police didn't note it in the report?
Yes, sir. So I'm just going to ask a question I've asked a couple of times before. What is the threshold, for the council as it relates? So, and I'm asking that because the mayoral order speaks to collaboration with federal agents. The mayor, from what I've seen and others have complained about, has not been totally clear on the nature of MPD federal collaboration. And there are complaints out the wazoo, as seen last week during the public works hearing. So my question is, at this point now, with evidence from or just testimony stacking up and people giving videos and showing all, what is the council doing? What is the council planning to do as far as if not stopping this collaboration, then holding MPD more accountable in how they collaborate with the feds?
Well, Remember, there are limitations on what the council can do. The council is the legislative branch. We do not supervise, we do not manage the.
I mean, that's debatable though. I mean, or, you know,
What's debatable?
the limitations that the council has, you know, some
We
people,
can't issue orders to the chief. We can't issue orders to the rank
no
and file.
legislation that y'all could do, you know, there's
Well, we
no
have a-
oversight that,
We have a law, so we can do oversight.
okay.
We can do oversight, but I began my comments by saying there are limitations on what the council can do. And I'm saying that in part because I've been at some community meetings where folks have said they want the council to stop this behavior. We don't control ICE, we don't control MPD, but we do have legislative here, we do have oversight. And of course, we can pass laws, but some of this behavior appears to be contrary to the law. We can't pass a law that somehow changes somebody breaking the law. I'm not sure I said that quite right, but we already have policies in place. They're called laws. And you may remember that we were asked to repeal one of those laws with regard to cooperation, and the council chose not to do that. I do think there need to be more oversight hearings. And I think they need to be not only more frequent, but sooner rather than later, because the public is very frustrated over what's going on. And there's no question but that we're not getting an accurate picture. I remember talking to the chief back in September, and I believe it was in September, and asked point blank about cooperation with ICE, and was told that had of course they're cooperative, but collaborating with them on their stops and at some of their activities, and the chief was quite clear that that wasn't happening, and it was just, I think it was a few days or a week later that the DC bilingual incident occurred. So there needs to be a much more of a public airing with regard to what's going on, because I'm hearing these reports just as you are, and that needs to be out in the open.
One more follow-up, sorry, y'all, but did you get a chance to hear what Chief Smith said in response to Councilmember Felder last week in regards to the Post article and how it
I read an account where she said that the Post had misstated, and it's not clear to me that the Post had misstated. Now, I think the incident with Benning Road, one of the things that really struck at me was Homeland Security's lie with regard to clearly the individual was driving toward the officers, and that was not true. That was false. And I think there were a couple other statements by Homeland Security that were just clearly false. I mean, they were lies, not misstatements, but lies. I've seen a picture of the bullet holes in the car seat. I think it's just shocking, and it should have been reported, meaning it should have been included in the police report. Behind you, Marquez, and then Martin.
Hi, thank you, Chairman. Continuing on juvenile curfew, if you can talk a little bit about, there's people in the Navy Yard neighborhood. There's a number of people who are saying that there wasn't an incident, that there were gathering of kids and teens, but that there wasn't any incidents, there wasn't any violence or anything like that until police showed up. Have you heard any of those arguments, and what would be, I guess, your response to that?
Well, no, and I am not familiar with the details of everything that happened. And the nature of your question is one where really there would be much more of, there would need to be more of an investigation as to the details. That should not be the case, meaning that when the police show up, the juveniles become more agitated. An important role of police is to de-escalate situations, not to escalate them.
And then this is kind of following up on some questioning from before of the argument from advocates about how there aren't safe spaces for kids to go late. So yes, there are rec centers and community centers, and sometimes some of them will have late hours, but it's not always everywhere and it's not consistent. Do you feel like there should be perhaps added funding or something else that the government can do to expand not just safe places for kids to go to should we have more of these curfews, but also places where they feel welcome, that they feel like they can go?
Yeah, I don't think that's the real issue. I think the real issue is that these flyers go out on social media that say, "Hey, come gather and congregate," and that sounds pretty exciting to these juveniles. And I think that's what the dynamic is. I think there are plenty of welcoming spaces and there are plenty of programming activities. Of course, we should look at whether there should be more, and we need to, of course, maintain what we've got. But this has been a refrain as long as I can remember. After the riots in '68, the government set up these youth councils, always looking at increasing alternative activities for juveniles as the answer. And I dare say that there's much more available to juveniles today than there was years ago. I don't think that's the issue. I think it's that these opportunities are very appealing to these juveniles.
And can I make sure I understand should the legislation ultimately pass, you were saying it wouldn't go into effect till the end of the year?
Well, the emergency would go into effect as soon as the mayor signs it.
Right, okay.
But the way we legislate, this gets into a bit of detail, but we adopt an emergency, which is in effect for 90 days as soon as the mayor signs it, and we adopt a temporary, which requires 2 votes and the mayor's signature, and then it's submitted to Congress for their 30 days. And their 30 days is not 30 days, it's much longer. And so that's what I was referring to, that the temporary wouldn't go into effect until the end of the year or early next year.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. Martin.
So this is unrelated to the agenda, but just following off of something you just said, have you gotten a sense that with the House being out of session as long as it has that further delayed when it's consideration of DC bills that were sent up there for review?
I believe so.
Do you have any idea of how badly delayed things might be? Because I know, like, let's say the budget, the Budget Support Act is
That
supposed to go into effect
became
in mid-December, but
No, I believe the Budget Support Act or the budget, one of them became effective around October 23rd.
yeah, I think it was the budget, but the Budget Support Act seems to be still under review.
Okay.
And yeah, this is very deep.
I'll take your word for it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it would affect that, but then we pass it on emergency so that it's in effect
Okay.
in the meantime.
On the decoupling issue, you said it's 13 of 83 provisions. And I mean, the CFO himself had said that if the council wanted to act, they had to act quickly because of the tax year coming up and getting changes done before the end of the year. And whether it's 13 or any number of changes that you want to make, that you want to decouple, some of them are significant. And someone could say, well, listen, when are we going to have a public discussion about this? We're talking about public hearings for other issues. Do you think there's room for a public hearing at some point to further consider any more decoupling? Will more decoupling be happening?
I'm hopeful that more decoupling will be happening. A permanent bill needs to be introduced, and of course, there needs to be a hearing when a permanent bill is introduced. So there will be a hearing, and probably there'll be more provisions that are added to the permanent legislation.
Okay. And then on the disapproval, so like you said, it's only $5.5 million. It's probably the smallest reprogramming that the mayor
Correct.
has sent down. I've been watching your hearings where you've kind of gone back and forth with executive
Yes, you
officials
get a
about
gold star
overspending.
for attendance.
Thank you. But you yourself have seemed frustrated by the realities that have been presented to you, that it seems like you guys have very limited tools to deal with overspending. And the tools that are presented to you is basically you can reject a reprogramming or a supplemental budget and then force an agency essentially to be anti-deficient. Do you think is the outcome of all of this going to be that you want to pass bills that give you guys more authority over this or give you more tools to work with so that you don't only have that one option, which seems
Well,
pretty drastic in the grand scheme of things?
I don't think it's drastic because it's not an issue of whether the district ends the fiscal year in balance. The district is going to end the fiscal year with a surplus. I'm virtually certain of that, even though I've not seen the audited statements because they're not audited yet. My sense of it is because there's so much money available for this reprogramming that there is a lot of underspending by agencies. And then, as you know, the revenue estimates came in higher than what had been projected in June, which was higher than what we had budgeted on. And you'll recall in June, the mayor wouldn't, excuse me, the CFO wouldn't let us spend that money. So this, I want to emphasize, this is not about whether the district will end the year in the black, because it will. And this also, this reprogramming does not affect any expenditures that have already been made. But what it does affect is this accounting maneuver where the agency that overspends is let off the hook because other agencies that didn't spend transfer their dollars. It's purely an accounting issue. And I think it's time that these agency directors be held deficient. And that's actually the expression is, or the correct phrase, terminology is deficient. They're deficient. As we have had these hearings, I have to say, I thought I knew the budget law pretty well, but I've become clearer on it and I am just shocked. The law is very clear that the chief financial officer is to manage expenditures so there is not a need for a supplemental budget. And every year we have a supplemental budget to cover overspending. The law is also very clear that the CFO is supposed to manage agency spending so that they are not deficient. That is, that they spend more than what they are budgeted. And we see every year about a dozen agencies that overspend. And some of them are repeat offenders. There was an analysis over the last, I think, 13 years, and I think DGS is one of the high serial offenders. And it raises a question about whether the budget is adequately budgeted. But the CFO and the mayor both say, the mayor says the budget is adequate for their needs and the CFO certifies it as balanced. I'm thinking, for example, overtime. And so that's a problem. But the spending and just the spending over what is budgeted without regard, because the solution is these reprogramming. So that's the impetus behind this disapproval.
And then last one on that issue, after going through all these hearings and kind of hearing all the things you've heard, I saw that other council members joined some of the hearings, but it's not that every council member joined. Is your message going to be to council members who chair committees that they just need to do better oversight? They need to press harder with agency directors about how money is being spent and when overspending is happening, and look at these reports that are supposed to be produced when there are spending pressures?
Well, they should. But I think the real culprits here are the agencies that are overspending and the agency fiscal officers who are not doing what the law requires in disallowing spending, but also issuing reports that are meaningful. Now, I didn't mention that a minute ago, but back when the control board was either about to descend or had descended upon us, the council changed the law with regard to financial controls and requires quarterly reports. There's supposed to be a report submitted to Congress within 15 days of the end of the quarter. We get these quarterly reports 2 months after the end of the quarter, which is sort of useless. And I think you were present when I read language in the DDOT quarterly report for December, the month of December a year ago, that said the overspending was due to the snowfall in January. Well, the snowfall hadn't happened yet. And HVAC repairs in the summer, well, the summer hadn't happened yet. And then the exact same language is in the next report. And then DDOT, they were projected to have, if I remember correctly, around at the time, about a $15 or $20 million spending pressure. And the CFO certified a supplemental budget to cut them another $6 million. If that didn't make sense, it's because it didn't make sense. They're overspending, so we're going to cut their budget more. And then end the year with a reprogramming request. So this is just crazy. And why does it matter? Well, first of all, we should stay within the budget, and that's what the law requires. But more importantly, for anyone out there who wants to see more money for police and law enforcement, when there's overspending, that money is not available. For anyone out there who wants to see more money available for affordable housing or to help renters who can't pay their rent, the money's not there because of overspending. Overspending, in July, it was estimated to be about $300 million for the fiscal year that just ended. That's $300 million that's not available for renter assistance, affordable housing, for public safety, for childcare subsidies, for early childhood educators. That money's just not available because it got overspent. So MPD budget, we have to double check these numbers, but coming into this briefing, the number that I had for police overtime was around $150 million. That's 150, $150 million. The budget request was for less than 30. Yes. And then Sam.
Thank you. Last week, during the roundtable on juvenile curfew, I believe it was Deputy Mayor Apia who had mentioned part of the push for expanding the youth curfew is in hopes of avoiding another federal takeover of MPD. What do you make of that argument? Is there credence to that?
I would say no, but I would say no because I think that the president's emergency declaration in August was a manufactured crisis. I said that at the time that it was manufactured. He said explicitly that crime was spiking in the district. When we saw the figures, it said we were at a 30-year low in violent crime. It was manufactured. On the other hand, I recognize what the deputy mayor is saying, which is that the slightest thing might trigger some sort of false reaction again. I like to use the word false because it seems to be used against us a lot. Sam?
Last Tuesday. So after hearing from the expert panel on the Aussie hearing and after talking to Aussie personnel, I just wanted to get a sense of what do you see as being the next steps, seeing as you mentioned, the complaints about bus service and timeliness have increased on a year-to-year basis. So even with the improvements that Aussie's making, and these are your words, it appears that there are still complaints. So after this 5-hour plus hearing, what are the next steps in terms of improving transportation? Or like, what did you gather from the expert panel that you would encourage Aussie to take on?
Well, I think that the situation with Aussie Dot, that's the school buses
Aussie Dot,
for children who have an IEP for special education that requires transportation. I think the situation with Aussie Dot is like drinking out of a fire hose. That is that there is a lot of dysfunction and they have to work their way out of it. They've taken some significant steps. For example, they identified roughly 1,000 kids who didn't need Aussie Dot. And they also have implemented some alternatives to the buses, like stipends to parents who are eligible to get their kids to school without relying on the bus. And so the demand for the bus service, which has been struggling with a high number of vacancies, that demand is lower. As the witness from OSSI testified last week, what they want is a bench, and by that, meaning that there are a few more drivers and there are routes to be driven in a day, a few more aides to be on the buses than there are buses, so that if something comes up, they have a bench that they can go to. And so that's part of it. The problems are multiple. And as a result, they have to figure out their workout plan. Two things. One is that I don't think they have a good workout plan. In fact, I don't think they have any workout plan that they've actually reduced to writing that says this is what we do before we do something else, before we do something after that, and to figure out that which will have take the longest to do, but have the greatest impact. A complicated plan. They need that. And then they would also was clear that if they would get this GPS tracking for buses in place, that that would help significantly. Right now, the only way that a parent can find out if a bus is on time or a late bus when it will arrive is to call the call center. And when you've got, if I remember correctly, over 3,000 kids who are using buses or Yes, who are using buses. That's a lot of calls to the call center. So one calls and then they're on hold forever. And if there was GPS tracking on the buses, then the parents wouldn't need to call the call center. You see that reduces the volume. And it also improves accountability. It reduces the complaints. So for example, there was a woman who came to me at a community meeting and identified that her child had the reliability was inconsistent and there were some other issues. And so I contacted the superintendent and the superintendent personally talked to the parent. That's just not an efficient way to run a system with several thousand kids. They need to work their way out of this so that it is less inefficient.
Follow-up questions. Would you say that you got any clarity around what took the procurement of the GPS software so long? Are you getting any
Well,
clarity?
they still haven't done the RFP. And that's why I'm having a follow-up hearing. We're looking at a date in early December for the follow-up hearing. I'm guessing that they will have the RFP out by then, which will be significant. I think there's some stupid issues that have gotten in the way, one of which is FERPA. FERPA is a right to privacy with regard to a person's medical condition, a student's medical condition. Being on a bus is like public knowledge and common knowledge and why the kids on the bus would be protected. But I think the lawyers have gotten in the way and said that the GPS tracking is in violation of FERPA, even though there are other jurisdictions that do this. I mean, it's just stupid if you ask me. So they need to get that in place. That will make a big difference in terms of reducing some of this pressure, this time that's not well spent by OSI personnel.
And just one last question concerning this. Is there in your mind some sort of timeline as to when you want to see this resolved? I hear like, the words work out. If I am saying it correctly, you want them to work out.
Well, I want them to come up with a plan.
Yeah.
I want them to get the GPS implemented. They have said that they want it implemented by next school year, but they've said that in the past and they need to get the RFP out. So my milestone is for a hearing, as I said, early December, where I'm going to ask about the plan and I'm going to ask about the GPS RFP.
But at what time would you want all of this resolved? Because like you said, they told you next school year and it hasn't happened yet, but is there like a deadline that you're, aiming for?
Well, that's what the plan would. I'm willing to let them identify their timelines. The challenge for me is that, I mean, I'd like to see the GPS tracking implemented immediately, but let's just go with their next school year. The challenge is that if they don't have an RFP to procure it, then they don't have it for next school year. Once they get the RFP, then they have to do the evaluation of the bids. And once they're finished with that, they then have to implement it. And I think they're going to have to do some testing. So give me the timeline in a plan, as well as other steps that they need to increase, to reduce the vacancies. And they also need to, I don't think, they need to also have more of a role in the transportation decision-making in these IEP teams. And they've been too passive about that as well. I have time for two more questions, Mr. Oskamiel.
The mic.
Are you okay with
Okay.
Bill?
Doesn't the CFO have what I would say absolute power to control over spending, especially through agency fiscal officers?
I believe he does.
And therefore, he is not exercising his authority as you would want him to, as the law requires?
I believe that's a part of the issue.
Part?
A part of the issue.
What else is there?
Well, it's much more complex. For instance, it's been too easy over the years to simply draw from the contingency funds and to spend that way. Well, that's a form of overspending. And these reports are not being done timely and they're not being done with fidelity to what the reports are supposed to do, which is identify spending pressures and corrective plans to eliminate the spending pressure. And there's been way too much reliance on reprogrammings to just make it look on paper like nobody overspent. And I think the executive is on the hook as well as the CFO, the OCFO.
Thank you.
Mr. Ostermeal, you'll be the last question.
Just back to kind of the issue of spending overtime specific, that a lot of this surrounds police overtime, like you said, $150 million potentially this year. Now, obviously, the council plays a role in that because the council, when they got the budget, the MPD budget said $17 million for overtime for FY25, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
I thought it was a little bit more like 26, but
Okay,
maybe-
26. But the point is, it is off by a number of factors. I mean,
Correct.
it's very low. So why doesn't the council just look at the last year and say, well, if MPD is spending 100+ million, we're just going to increase MPD's budget in the budget to reflect that fact? Unless you're saying that you don't want overtime by police, it seems like the council should just adjust the budget and say, all right, well, if MPD has a $600 million budget as proposed, we're going to increase it to 700 million, and that'll include all the overtime that they need.
Well, you asked a question as if there's just money sitting around that's available to increase. The mayor has the best shot at crafting a budget that makes sense. I think we're going to see this year that the CFO is going to require that for MPD and a couple other agencies that overtime has to be budgeted appropriately. Many years ago, when Kathy Lanier became chief of the police department, MPD had a significant overtime spending. MPD had significant overtime spending, and there was pressure from the council to rein that in, and Kathy Lanier reined it in. She reduced overtime significantly. There seems to be this acceptance that, well, there's no alternative, but if the mayor and the chief are not going to require a reduction in overtime, then it needs to be adequately budgeted. And I will say that because I see this with the agencies under the committee of the whole, the agency will always say the budget we have is adequate. Well, excuse me, but your overtime last year was X amount, and the amount that's in the budget for this year is less. Oh, we're going to implement different measures to reduce the overtime. That's what they say. But what we're seeing with several agencies is that doesn't happen. So I think the mayor's going to have to put more money in for overtime. And I'm hopeful that between the mayor and the chief, they will also look harder at ways that they can reduce the overtime. Thank you all very much. I'll see you all tomorrow at 11. Yes, there's a breakfast.